Hello everybody. I wanted to do a quick post today, just a little introduction to a table saw, or rather what you need to check when you first get your table saw. So this video is actually for amateurs, people that have never really used a table saw before, or even if you've only used it a few times, this might be for you. But if you're old hand at this, then yeah, this is not gonna benefit you any because you know all this. So just real quick, recently I got a table saw to do some projects. As you can see in the background here, I'm working on it, and I'll talk about that later. But I never really used a table saw before, so I got online, did a lot of reading to kind of figure out how to use one properly, because these things are very dangerous. It's nothing to necessarily be afraid of, but definitely something that should be respected. So what I wanted to go over just briefly real quick is when you first get your very first table saw, what you need to do. Okay, so out of the box, I got this Hitachi, and it was pretty much assembled. Everything was put together very well. I was very pleased with that. However, one thing that I learned is that don't assume that everything is put together properly when you unbox your table saw, okay? Make sure you follow the directions. Look through the manual. Yes, I know, I read through the manual a couple times actually, to make sure that I did everything correctly. Some of the things that I recommend, number one is read the manual. Number one, always read the manual. Number two, when you get your table saw set up and put together, leave it unplugged and just play around with it. And what I mean by that is turn some of these knobs, see what they do some measurements. So for example, this is your fence, this is your blade. Some of these, like mine, have a ruler on it. You can double check and make sure that where it's gonna cut is the right measurement and all that stuff. And you can check that later on by cutting a board, but this is pre-plug in all of that stuff, okay? So a couple of things. Number one, make sure the base, if yours comes with legs, make sure those are secured. The one thing you do not want is as you're pushing any boards that this shifts, that can cause some major problems. Again, most of these are pretty well put together, but one thing that I did that I highly recommend is you go through with all the nuts and the bolts and your wrenches, just as, you know, even if it looks like it's tight, stick your screwdriver in there, give it a little tweak, make sure that it's in there tight, or your Allen wrench or whatnot. The other thing that I recommend, other than the base and then just checking everything, is to, again, make sure that your blade is correctly aligned and attached. So get in here and start playing with this while it's unplugged before you even make your first cut, because it's important to understand how this blade is turning, how it's attached, what's going on underneath, instead of just blindly going in and saying, I'm just gonna start cutting boards, because that's not very safe, okay? So get in there, make sure your blade is tightened correctly. Make sure that all your guards are placed on correctly. You'll notice that I don't have my blade guard on, but I do have my anti-kickback and a few of those other things designed to do that. So I highly advise that you use those. Again, I am not an expert on this by any means, so any of the woodworkers out there that see something I'm doing wrong, please comment. I will add that in here saying, oh no, this is actually wrong. But this is from me just watching other viewers, reading tons and tons about the correct way to do this. So what I wanted to do, like I said, is kind of talk about a few things that you do prior to even making your first cut. A couple other things. Make sure you know where your on and off switch are. Now this one comes with a nice switch that I can just hit with my knee if I need to turn it off. Make sure you're very familiar with that position. The other thing I highly recommend when you first get your table saw, most of them come with a little push stick. And for most of your dimensional lumber, some of the thick stuff, this works just fine to help kind of push things across the table. However, one of my very first cuts I had to do on this thing was very small trim, okay? I just need to trim just a little bit off. There's a couple of different ways to do that. If you want to move your fence, so this is a fence lock, right? So again, make sure you know where all this stuff is. You can move your fence. However, as you notice here, if I want my fence really close to this, I'm gonna have to remove all the guard that I have here in order to get that really close, okay? If that is your preference, if that is how you decide you need to cut for whatever purpose, and you're not gonna have any of these guards on, I advise not to use these kind of thicker sticks because there's more movement. You might have to make a few adjustments by making new sticks. So I had to do that. I had to make a super tiny cut. I decided to cut it on this side of the fence, so I had to remake a little bitty push stick across that, okay? Or you just cut it on the opposite side of the board and just get your measurements on the opposite side so that the trim that you want is on this side. Again, you're gonna want some push sticks and all that good stuff. So before you even start going, I would say look at some different push stick designs that's online, or you can purchase some of those kind of push paddles and sticks that will help you out as well. So I've still got some that I'm gonna make. I've got some little ones. I don't know where they're at. Oh, they're over there now. But I advise that you become very familiar with these. And then just a quick tip that I picked up. When you're pushing things across, most people, and me included, wanted to keep your hand or your push stick kind of as far away as possible from the blade. The problem that presents sometimes, particularly without this guard on there, is it pushes your board towards the blade, and that can cause it to kick back. And that's one of the big things about using a table saw, is you're worried about kickback and of course running your hand across it. So that's what push sticks are for, so that you can get on this side of the blade close to it. So as you're pushing, it's actually helping to keep it against this fence so that it doesn't twist or anything of that nature. I've been pretty pleased with the little bitty guards, the kickback guards that are on here, because it helps to prevent a lot of that wood from catching on that, which is super, super nice. So I don't know why you wouldn't cut without one of these. I mean, obviously if you're trying to do some cutouts or dados or something like that, then you wouldn't need that or use that necessarily, but always keep that in place, man. Again, read through the directions. It'll tell you when it's appropriate, when it's not. That's kind of what I've learned through just the first couple of weeks that I've started playing with this thing. I would go through, just kind of check all the screws, keep the thing unplugged, just wheel it up, turn it, check all the different screws and bolts, and make sure everything was stable. That's extremely important. The last thing, of course, is making sure that your blades are aligned. Actually, I got two more tips here. Make sure your blades are aligned. I've seen where people get the magnetic, it's a magnetic, I guess, angle guide that you can stick on your blade, and it'll tell you if your blade's at 0 or whatnot. And I've seen people do that, but one thing I see that they kind of fail to mention is if your table is not flat, as in it's not at 0 degrees, say you're on just a little bit of an incline, kind of sideways, then that's useless in terms of trying to figure out what your blade angle is at. So the easiest way, of course, is to get your square, crank up your blade, and then use your square to make sure that it is at a 0 degree, okay? Now again, you might be eyeballing it, but again, the closer you get, the better, but use a square. It's super, super easy, super effective, and if you're off, you're barely off any. But the moment you start moving that blade, you'll be able to see the difference in that. Now, if you're trying to get another angle that's not 0 or 45, if you're trying to do that with you, then yeah, you might need to go somewhere else. Or to make sure that your angle guide is correct, which this one is not, okay? So that's something else to check, is your angle guide, because it is not always spot on. Like this one is not set to 0 for up and down, it's actually set to like 1 degree. So it's a little bit off. Now you can adjust those if you like. I just haven't gotten around to do that because I've set it once and I've never had to change it because I'm not doing any of those cuts. But if you're gonna be doing 30s and 15s or whatever, then yeah, you're gonna have to get in there and check that. Okay, anyway, those were just some things to look out for when you first get your table saw. Like I said, play around with it before you even plug the thing in. See what everything does. Move the fence, lock the fence, see how much give you have in it. Check your bolts. There's a lot, I think, of prep work to do prior to turning your first table saw on. And again, this is just coming from an amateur in terms of, again, not being necessarily afraid of a table saw, but being very cautious of the table saw. And I say that because a friend of mine actually did lose his fingers on a table saw. and he was lucky that they were able to attach those. So I've always been wary of these, but I'm becoming more comfortable with it. That doesn't mean that I forget where my hands are located. Before you even start your first cut, you really need to think through, where's my hands gonna be as I push this through. Because one thing that I've noticed, and I've heard many woodworkers say this, as you're moving that board, you might be trying to focus on its placement along the fence, and you kind of realize, oh, my hand's getting a little bit close to that. My hand's getting a little bit close to that, particularly on cutting long boards where you're really pushing a lot of work through there. It's very easy to get kind of in this motion and maybe get a little bit too close. Okay, again, that's why your push stick is there to alleviate that. Or you put on that guard, so even if your hand gets close, it touches that guard and it kind of reminds you that, oh, I'm getting too close, okay? So be aware of that. I will more than likely, once I do some of these other cuts, I can put the guard on. I will be doing that. It's just the type of cuts that I was doing today. Didn't really afford that kind of, I needed to kind of see where things were at to make these cuts, because I was trying to do much, much finer cuts. Okay, anyway, I've rambled on long enough. If you have any tips or tricks, please let me know. For all of you experienced woodworkers, let me know what they are so I can kind of add those to my repertoire as well. All right, guys, so I'll talk more about this project maybe on my next post. All right, appreciate it.